Hello and welcome again to This Much is True Crime. And today we're talking about a fairly current, very current case that has just come to note and been in the headlines, and it's that of Peter Sullivan. Yeah. And now, see, you're, as I almost say all the time, you're the kind of considerate one, former prison governor, academic, whereas I'm more the hothead in this. And this is bloody outrageous.
Oh no, I agree. I don't think there's any disagreement from this side of the house about how awful this story is.
This is Peter Sullivan, a man who has spent almost 4 decades in jail for a crime he didn't commit.
Yeah, and I'm actually exactly the same age as Peter Sullivan, and so this is a man who was convicted in 1987 of having murdered a woman the year before called Diane Sindall, who was 21, raped, beaten to death, a terrible crime. And Peter Sullivan is going to be convicted of that crime. He signs a confession, although that he's a man that has learning difficulties. And there is some sense, therefore, we're in that territory, even though we're in 1986, 87, of false confession. There would have been pace by this stage, but we're into why do people confess to something that they haven't done? That also implies he wasn't properly represented at the time. He wasn't getting the legal advice he should have been given.
Was he denied legal advice? This is the thing, though. Or did he even know he was entitled to legal advice?
Who knows if he was even read his rights as he should have been. But I thought about that, Martin. I've thought about this case, as dreadful as it is, but simply based on the fact I'm the same age. I remember what I was doing in 1986. And, in 1986, I wasn't married. I got married. I have had children. I've got grandchildren. We bought and sold 4 houses in that time. Think of all the changes that Peter Sullivan has missed as a consequence of being wrongly incarcerated, and now he's got to pick up his life again. It just seems overwhelming.
I know, it does make, when you look at it and you realize, gosh, all that time, where were we? Where were you? I looked back to 87, which I think is when he went to jail, and I just worked out that it was the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, Zeebrugge disaster, which was the first big story I did. It was for TVAM, live on a barge looking at this cross-channel ferry on its side. Almost 200 people died in that. Well, 100, actually more than 200. It was passengers plus crew, of course. There with Kay Burley, that was the two of us, our first big break on live television. And since then went on to do Berlin Wall, Tiananmen Square, all those kind of things. And then, of course, television producing as such, and my children, and our homes and my marriage. And he's missed all that.
I know. And did you pick up what he said?
Yeah,
when he was exonerated.
Yeah, and we'll come on to where he was when he was exonerated and why he was exonerated. But he came out, and his solicitor said on his behalf, she said, "I'm not angry, and I'm not bitter."
Extraordinary.
All that time. Now, first of all, I was astonished again that we've been speaking on our various previous podcasts about how some of these dreadful evil characters, when they're being sentenced, a lot of the time now they choose not to appear in court.
Yeah.
So Peter Sullivan is in Wakefield prison. They know that the appeal judges are going to say this that day, that you're a free man. They knew this was coming. Why is he not brought down from Wakefield prison to spend the night in the Dorchester before he goes to the Court of Appeal, and he's given a nice suit that they pay for, and has his shoes shined that they pay for, and a nice haircut and a facial, whatever he wants, because they've wronged him? Why does he not get that treatment to, we made a mistake, please come and hear it from us, as opposed to on a video call, down the line from Wakefield jail?
Well, it's interesting that you're concentrating on those aspects about that they made a mistake. I would just have liked to have heard an apology, both from the Criminal Cases Review Commission and an apology from the police who originally investigated the case. Neither apology came yesterday or the day before.
No, and I know, and I've met the chief constable of Merseyside, who's a lovely woman. I met her daughters. I can't believe that she doesn't feel a lot of empathy with what this man has gone through. The spokesperson from Merseyside Police came out and said, we understand, he must have had a tough time. But there was no, oh, we're sorry, or we'll look into it. It's just that, can you remember what you were doing 40 years ago? Because now we've opened the case again.
And of course, we're slightly jumping ahead in terms of the story of what happens. But of course, DNA and developments in the extraction or the ability to use DNA to produce a sample that's usable in terms of there being a connection to a particular individual. DNA has developed. But of course, what did we discover? There is no DNA hit on the National DNA Database for the sample that has now been shown to have exonerated Peter Sullivan. It's one of the things that's really frustrated me about the publicity in relation to this, because in one sense, it's quite right. The publicity is about developments in forensic science. But as I've said on this podcast before, DNA is largely irrelevant as a crime-fighting tool. And so I'm constantly saying that's not how the vast majority of murder cases get solved or lead to a conclusion. It's got nothing to do with DNA. It's got to do with good old-fashioned, in those terms, policing. And that's what clearly failed in Peter Sullivan's case. There wasn't good old-fashioned policing. There was simply what we've called in the past, I've explained in the past, confirmation bias. The police find somebody, circumstantial confirmation bias. They find a loner who's got learning difficulties and make him the suspect and don't look at other possibilities. And even at the time, in 1986, 1987, a dentist, because of course the police at the time weren't able to extract the DNA samples, but what they did have were bite marks on poor Diane Sindall's body. And those bite marks, those bite marks did not match the bite of Peter Sullivan.
I don't want to go into too much detail because it was semen that of the unknown killer.
Yeah.
That they got the DNA from.
Yeah.
Did they exhume her body then at some point? How would they have had access to her body if they didn't take DNA at the time?
Oh no, they would have swabbed her at the time in the.
So they would have that in their record.
Yes, and they would also have had some of her possessions, some of her clothing that she wore.
But they couldn't match it to Peter Sullivan.
They couldn't match it to Peter Sullivan. So they were relying on...
With any reliable result.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens. And of course, therefore, the story becomes one of the changes in forensic science and how DNA can be extracted from ever smaller amounts of biological material. And that's what really has allowed this case to reach a conclusion where Peter Sullivan is exonerated. But of course, we're talking quite rightly about that exoneration because it's 38 years he's been in jail. But it does also mean that the Sindall family have no justice themselves. What happened to their daughter, their fiance? She was engaged to be married. So there's still a kind of miscarriage for them. There's still a family seeking justice for their daughter in that respect. But and so there's tragedy all around here. And as far as I'm concerned, something I've shared repeatedly with you, as far as I'm concerned, it is the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which increasingly does not feel fit for purpose. There is something wrong about how the Criminal Cases Review Commission is operating. And of course, they had the opportunity in 2016.
Several times they could have opened this and reviewed it, and they didn't.
No. And in fact...
And he always protested his innocence.
He's always protested his innocence, although he's had this confession. He signs a confession. So that kind of...
But then retracted it.
But that sense of false confession is part of the legacy of these historic miscarriage of justice cases. You will discover that if you look carefully at those historic cases, there is usually some kind of coercive and false confession, which allows the police to say, oh, well, and then Joe Bloggs might be confessing just because he feels under such pressure, he's not been appropriately legally represented, and he thinks, oh, well, I'll just confess to it, and then I'll retract my confession, and that'll be fine. Well, it isn't. That's not how it works, because once you've said something and signed to say you've said it, that becomes a legal document that's taken forward by the Crown Prosecution Service.
And if you're in jail and you refuse to accept your conviction, you say, I'm sorry, it's not me, I am still innocent. That is why he was given 16 years for murder. He served more than twice that. And that's because if you don't accept it, then what happens? You're just what they throw away the keys, do they, basically?
Well, why do you think he was being interviewed from Wakefield jail, which locks up Category A prisoners? Because if you don't acknowledge your guilt, which he couldn't because he was actually innocent, but if you don't acknowledge your guilt, you are not reclassified. And what I've described in my own academic writings is that this is called a throffer, which is the mixture of a threat with an offer. The offer is, if you admit to your guilt, you get parole, you get reclassified so that you go down the security classifications, you end up in an open prison. But that's the offer. But the threat is, if you don't do any of that, you stay where you are, because we still see you as a risk because you're not owning your offense.
But at what point does a prison governor or someone in authority realize, at some point, if he was just, pretending and wanted to sort of, reduce his sentence, or get out of jail earlier, he could have played it very straight and said, all right, yeah, fair cop, it was me. If I'm well behaved, can 16 years come down to 10, come down to 8, whatever it was. But he maintained his innocence, probably knowing that, he wasn't going to get out until he did admit it, if ever. Wouldn't somebody at some point think, he really does believe this. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we should really think about this. Maybe we should take him seriously.
And Martin, you've set that up beautifully. And you know that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about men who are innocent even after conviction and maintaining their innocence is because I had to manage a well-known miscarriage of justice case, a man called Stefan Kiszko. And Stefan Kiszko was a man of limited educational opportunities, a loner, a big shuffling man who was convicted for the rape and murder of a schoolgirl called Leslie Molseed. And seemingly there was forensic evidence, semen, that's going to connect him to Leslie Molseed's murder. He came to the jail that I was a governor in, and it was one of the hospital officers. We put him in the hospital unit, and it was one of the hospital officers that said to me, Governor, you should have a look at this case. And I said, why? He said, well, this man can't be guilty of this crime. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, he's got Klinefelter syndrome. And I went, what is Klinefelter syndrome? And he said, well, it means he can't produce semen, for one. So any semen found on the victim's body couldn't have been his. When you start then officially raising this, hang on, this man probably is innocent. This man has always maintained his innocence. People started to say, and this is true, I had a psychiatrist look at Stefan Kiszko, and he wrote me a note and said, David, he's got delusions of innocence. And I'm like, what have we got to do to try and make people think seriously that this man did not kill this little girl and the real killer was still at large? To cut a long story short, what I did in that situation was I leaked my anxiety to somebody I trusted in the media to say, you should be considering this. Have a look again at this case. And eventually, not through that process, he had a really wonderful solicitor, Stefan Kiszko, called Campbell Malone. And it was Campbell Malone that picked up the case and really drove it through. And guess what? Stefan Kiszko is exonerated as never having killed Leslie Molseed. And the real culprit was then subsequently arrested.
There's two things here. Am I way out of line suggesting that Peter Sullivan was fitted up
No, I don't think you're well out of line. I think that's exact.
by the police and authorities. All that going on as well. And I wonder, how he was treated in jail. How would he be treated in jail going into prison with a 16-year sentence for murdering a young woman and the press calling him the Beast of Birkenhead?
Well, badly is the long and the short of it. He would have been in solitary confinement for a while until he could find his feet. He would have been in a sex offender unit. Because remember, the poor victim, Diane Sindall, was raped. So the rape would have also meant that he was in the sex offender unit. He would be seen as a sex offender, a nonce. He's quite clearly not at the top of a prisoner-inmate hierarchy. He's at the very bottom. And of course, the constant threat that someone at the bottom of that kind of hierarchy faces. And he was known as the Beast of Birkenhead. Wakefield Prison is known in the prison system as Monster Mansion because it locks up a great many men who have that kind of profile in relation to the offences they've committed.
And the other one, apart from being fitted up by the police and authorities, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which I didn't realise is independent of government, and the commissioners are actually appointed by the King, previously the Queen. So during Peter Sullivan's time, when he was trying to get them to look at it, it would be the Queen that would have appointed these commissioners. And do they come from a default position of we reckon the court and the jury got it right, you really have to prove to us you got it wrong big time, pal?
Yeah,
there's no way we could have made a mistake, but we'll have a look.
They will only have a look if the person claiming to have been the victim of a miscarriage of justice, if their legal team brings forward evidence that wasn't available at the time of their trial or at the time of their appeals, which a jury would have found persuasive in changing their verdict. So lots of people might apply to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, but unless there's new evidence, then the Criminal Cases Review Commission will say, well, we're not going to look at that case.
But should they not, especially not just this one, but quite a few we've been speaking about down through the past few weeks, if it's circumstantial evidence, which, I would call that if it's shaky evidence, nothing sort of right, bang to rights got you, but it's circumstantial. Isn't that a reason for them to treat those kind of cases with a little bit more respect and say, well, maybe we should just really have a dig into this?
And there has been a recent review by KC in relation to the Andrew Malkinson case, who has made recommendations very much of the kind that you are recommending. The other thing, remember, that I've again said publicly is that I worry that many, not the commissioners, not the people at the top of the tree, the commissioners of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, but many of the staff that review these cases, they review these cases from a background which is one of having been police officers. And I slightly have said, wait a minute, if they come from a background of being police officers, they are in a sense marking the homework of other police officers. Why can't you get researchers reinvestigating, re-looking at this evidence who don't come from a policing background? You and I both do the media. We've worked with really talented researchers. Why don't you get people from different backgrounds that could perhaps do the research that you're relying on ex-police officers doing? So there are a number of things that come in there that make the CCRC slightly troubling. And you mentioned the fact that they're appointed by the Crown. If you're an organization that's appointed by the Crown to look at potential miscarriages of justice, and if you come to a decision that there has been a miscarriage of justice, it seems to me that you load on another layer of bureaucracy when you say, yeah, there's been a miscarriage of justice, let's put it back to the Court of Appeal for the Court of Appeal to agree that there's been a miscarriage of justice. Why do we need to do that?
And I was really surprised to see that from the number of cases that get put to them each year saying, please look at this, please open this again, please, have a view on this. very few are actually entertained. Very few are entertained, but the ones that do, and it's a small percentage, but the ones that they do look into, 66% of those are found to have been miscarriages of justice. Now, you would think if you're getting such a high strike rate of the cases that you do look into, why do you not look into more? Or maybe, I mean, I think their budget is only like £5 or £6 million a year. Maybe it's a lack of resources.
Oh, I think you're being kind. I think it's an organization that isn't fit for purpose. I don't think it's being properly managed. I don't think that the leadership, the training, I just don't think they're getting it right.
Well, she's gone. The boss has had to go. The boss has had to fall on her sword because the government couldn't sack her because she's appointed by the king. The king would have had to sack her.
She was only working 2 days a week.
But she's gone now. So yeah, so it's, well, you're right. I mean, there's been criticism from all quarters that, this is just outrageous.
But, some people out there, because, at the end of the day, we need a functioning justice system. Democracy is based on justice systems operating appropriately. And the CCRC is the backstop. It's the absolute backstop to say, if we've made a mistake, we'll put that mistake right. Currently, so people will be thinking, oh my gosh, there can't be another case like Peter Sullivan. Currently, I looked, knowing we were discussing this, there are 945 cases under review. So you can imagine the scale. Some of those cases will just be people saying, have a look again. What does that tell us about how people get convicted of murder? What does that tell us about the original police investigation? And again, I'll come back to my anxiety about false confession, the pressure that sometimes the police are under to get the culprit. And sometimes that pressure is then put on to the suspect if that suspect isn't appropriately legally represented.
Now, goodness knows how Peter Sullivan rebuilds his life. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I presume, he's institutionalized, clearly. Yeah. He has to come out and you'd like to think someone's paying for the best possible help. Yeah. I'll bet he has to fight for that. But you'd like to think someone's paying for it. But the talk is that the compensation he will get now for being wrongly convicted and spending almost 4 decades in jail is capped at £1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that per year then?
£25,000 a year, which, yeah. Now, with someone with learning difficulties, trying to work out, what would he have earned each year? Maybe it's not far off that. I don't know. But it's nowhere near compensation for pretty much most of your life, all your adult life, pretty much being banged up.
Until 2 years ago, Martin, that £1 million would also have had deducted from it the cost of bed and board for being inside. The prison service used to deduct a per diem rate for the fact that you had food, that you had heat, lighting, access to healthcare and so forth. Thankfully, that has changed. All I can say is, if you look at the United States, which is a criminal justice system I know well, there are some states in the United States that don't give any compensation at all. So you might have been the victim of a miscarriage of justice, but a number of states won't compensate you for the fact that you were wrongly convicted. The most I've seen in the United States for somebody who has been the victim of a miscarriage of justice is $7.5 million. So, we're probably therefore somewhere around the middle in terms of the compensation we're prepared to pay out.
Peter Sullivan may well say that I don't need £1 million now for the rest of my life, another 20 years, hopefully, that he might have. But that's not the point, clearly. If we've done someone wrong, we should be able to find money. Now, whether it's Mr. Bates in the post office, or whether it's infected blood scandals, or whether it's miscarriages of justice, there is money out there that we can help people with, if for no other reason than just saying, this is the marker that we got it wrong, this is what it costs, and it shouldn't happen again. It's like we're making a statement, not just him coming out of jail saying I'm free, but the penalty on the state is this, that makes us say, this is costing us money. You officials have to get it right.
Well, 3 cheers to that. And I absolutely hope that happens in Peter Sullivan's case. But I would also like us to end, Martin, by thinking about Diane Sindall and Diane Sindall's family and friends, because there's a family now still searching for justice after all these years as well.
And reopening a case like that, what chance really do they have?
Nil.
Is there any positive from this at all then, apart from Sullivan's a free man?
Positive is that there is a DNA profile, and the police will consistently upload that DNA profile onto the National DNA database to see if there is a match. But, you know, perhaps that person has the culprit, the actual culprit, has died. Perhaps they have never committed another offense. Perhaps they've moved and live abroad. So who knows if there's going to be a match? There may be some opportunity through familial DNA, but I think that's of scant consequence when the Sindalls will be thinking, well, we had come mentally to a closure, a psychological closure in relation to the guilty party being Peter Sullivan. That isn't the case, and therefore they are still searching for justice.
And again, Sullivan in his statement saying that he's not angry and he's not bitter. He paid a lot of respect and concern for her family.
Doesn't he come across as, you know, he's been labeled in the press, and we've mentioned it once or twice, he said learning difficulties. My gosh, a man with learning difficulties, to show that level of compassion and humanity, well, it's remarkable.
Let's hope Diane's family find some justice eventually, and that Peter enjoys what he has left of life. David, thank you. Until the next time.
Thanks, Martin.